It was a bright morning in a small town where everyone seemed to know everyone. The police station sat on the corner of Main Street, a modest building with faded blue paint and a flag fluttering lazily in the wind. Inside, the day had started like any other. Officers were laughing, sipping their coffee, talking about the weekend. Among them was Officer Daniels, a man known for his loud jokes and a habit of teasing others without thinking much about it. He wasn't cruel by nature, just careless, the kind of person who thought humor could smooth over any situation. Around 11 o'clock, the front door opened, and a woman walked in. She was tall, calm, and confident, dressed simply in a cream blouse and dark slacks. She carried a small notebook and wore a quiet smile, the kind that held both warmth and composure. Her name was Alicia Brown. She had arrived without an announcement, saying she had an appointment with the department to review some community records. The desk sergeant nodded and told her to have a seat while they checked. The station wasn't busy that day, so people noticed her quickly. Some wondered who she was. Others didn't care. Daniels, always the curious one, leaned against the counter nearby and started chatting. "So what brings you to our little corner of the world?" he asked, flashing his usual half-smile. Alicia smiled back politely. "Just here for some routine work," she said softly. Her voice was calm, pleasant, but carried a confidence that made Daniels curious. He noticed her notebook, the government seal faintly visible on its cover, but he didn't pay much attention. They spoke for a few minutes about the town, the weather, and the community. Daniels was easygoing, trying to make small talk while others in the room listened. A few officers laughed when he cracked a harmless joke or two. Alicia responded kindly, but didn't say much beyond polite answers. There was something about her presence, calm, measured, as if she was always observing. When she stood up to stretch, Daniels noticed her hair. It was full, coiled naturally, thick and healthy. He'd never admit it, but he had a habit of commenting on people's looks, especially when he thought it would get a laugh from the room. "That's quite the hair you got there," he said, chuckling. "Must take hours to deal with, huh?" A couple of officers smirked, shaking their heads. Alicia looked at him for a moment, her face unreadable. "It takes as long as it needs," she replied simply. Daniels grinned, trying to keep the mood light. "You know," he said, picking up a pair of clippers from a desk nearby that one of the guys used for trimming their beard, "you'd save yourself a lot of time if you just shaved it all off." Laughter bubbled around the room. Someone said, "Careful, Daniel, she might take you seriously." Alicia didn't laugh. She just watched him quietly, eyes calm but steady. Trying to get a bigger laugh, Daniels made a mock motion with the clippers, pretending like he'd buzz off a lock of her hair. The sound of the clippers filled the room for a second, followed by an awkward silence. Alicia didn't move, didn't flinch, but the expression on her face changed. Still calm, but now colder, as if something inside her had closed off. The laughter stopped almost immediately. One of the officers muttered, "Man, that's not funny." Daniels froze, realizing too late that he'd crossed a line. "Hey, I was just kidding," he said quickly. Didn't mean anything by it. Alicia looked at him, her eyes firm but not angry. "That's quite a way to greet a visitor," she said softly, then turned toward the front desk. Her voice wasn't raised, but it carried a weight that made everyone in the room uncomfortable. Daniel's grin vanished. He mumbled something about just joking, but nobody was laughing anymore. A moment later, the chief of police walked in. Chief Turner was an older man, usually calm and good-natured. When he saw Alicia standing there, his expression changed instantly. He straightened his back and walked over quickly. "Ms. Brown," he said, his tone suddenly respectful, "we didn't expect you until next week." Daniels blinked, looking from the chief to Alicia. "Ms. Brown?" That tone, something wasn't adding up. Alicia smiled faintly, still calm. "Plans changed," she said. "I thought I'd stop by today." "I hope that's not a problem." The chief stammered, "Of course not, of course not. We're honored to have you." He turned to the rest of the room, his voice low but sharp. "Everyone, this is Director Alicia Brown from the National Public Accountability Office. She's here for an internal assessment." The room fell completely silent. Daniels felt his stomach twist. "Director? As in federal director?" His mouth went dry. Alicia stood quietly as the realization spread. Daniels wished the floor would swallow him whole. He wanted to say something, anything, but no words came out. The chief quickly apologized for the unfortunate misunderstanding, but Alicia waved it off with a polite nod. "It's fine," she said. I'd like to proceed with the visit as planned. I'll be observing how things operate here today. Her tone was professional, even gentle, but everyone could feel the shift in the air. It wasn't just another visit anymore. For the rest of the morning, Alicia observed quietly. She followed the officers around as they handled calls, filled out reports, and spoke with the public. She never interrupted or criticized. She just took notes in her small notebook. Daniels could feel her presence everywhere he went. Every time he tried to laugh or crack a joke, the memory of what he'd done hung over him like a shadow. The other officers avoided eye contact with him, pretending to be busy. At lunchtime, Alicia joined them in the small break room. The atmosphere was tense. No one wanted to say the wrong thing. She spoke a little about community relations, asking gentle questions about how they handled complaints and how often they engaged with residents outside of law enforcement. Her questions were polite but thoughtful, and the officers knew she was paying attention to every word. Daniels sat quietly in the corner, picking at his sandwich, trying not to draw attention. He kept thinking about how stupid that joke had been. He didn't mean harm, he really didn't. But looking back, he realized how disrespectful it must have felt. She didn't even know him, and he had acted like she was some kind of prop for entertainment. The thought made him sick. At one point, Alicia asked if she could see the officers' community outreach files. The chief led her to a small office. Daniels trailed behind, feeling like he should apologize again, but the timing never seemed right. When Alicia finished reviewing the files, she looked up at the chief. "You have some good programs here," she said, "but it seems participation has dropped lately." The chief nodded awkwardly. "Yes, ma'am, we've been short-staffed." Alicia smiled faintly. "Understandable. Still, people tend to engage more when they feel respected and heard." Her eyes flicked toward Daniels briefly, just for a second. He felt the sting of that glance, even though she said nothing directly to him. It wasn't anger, it was disappointment, which somehow felt worse. Later that day, she asked to observe a patrol. Daniels volunteered, perhaps out of guilt, perhaps out of a desperate need to make up for his mistake. She agreed without comment. The drive was quiet at first. Daniels kept his eyes on the road, unsure how to start. Finally, he said, "I really am sorry about earlier. I was just trying to make everyone laugh. It was stupid." Alicia looked out the window for a moment before replying. "I know you were trying to be funny," she said softly. "But you have to understand. When you joke about something that's part of who someone is, it doesn't feel like humor. It feels like mockery." Daniels nodded, embarrassed. "I didn't mean it like that." "Intent isn't everything," she said gently. "Sometimes what matters more is how it makes the other person feel." Her voice wasn't harsh. It was almost kind. That made it hit even harder. He nodded again, unable to find the right words. They rode in silence for a while until they stopped at a small park where some kids were playing basketball. Daniels greeted a few locals, and Alicia watched as he interacted with them. He was good with people, friendly, easygoing. But she noticed how some of the residents, particularly those from minority backgrounds, were polite but distant. There was a barrier there, subtle but clear. She wrote a few notes quietly, not saying much. By the time they returned to the station, the sun was starting to dip behind the buildings. The day had been long, but Alicia still looked composed, not tired, just thoughtful. The chief invited her to his office to go over her initial observations. Daniels could hear bits of their conversation from the hallway. She spoke calmly, pointing out strengths and weaknesses, never raising her voice, never shaming anyone. Still, her words carried weight. Afterward, as she prepared to leave, she walked past Daniels. For a brief moment, she stopped. "Officer Daniels," she said, her tone even. He stood quickly. "Yes, ma'am?" She studied him for a second before saying, "You have a lot of potential. You just need to learn where kindness ends and disrespect begins." Then she gave a small nod and left. He stood there for a long time after she was gone, staring at the door. The other officers avoided his eyes. The chief walked over and sighed. "You really stepped in it this time," he muttered. Daniels didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I know." That night, as he drove home, Daniels replayed the entire day in his mind. Every word, every look, every moment of silence. He realized that it wasn't just about one stupid joke. It was about an attitude he'd carried for years without realizing the damage it could do. He had thought humor could excuse anything. He was wrong. Meanwhile, Alicia sat in her hotel room typing up her notes from the day. She didn't write with anger, only precision. Her reports always focused on building awareness rather than breaking people down. Still, she couldn't help feeling a familiar heaviness. She had experienced moments like this many times, small acts that revealed big truths about how people saw her. But she also believed in change, and she'd seen it happen before. She hoped quietly that this would be one of those times. Outside, the town lights glowed softly against the night sky. At the station, the laughter had long faded, replaced by an uneasy quiet. The officers knew something had shifted, something deeper than embarrassment or fear of punishment. For Daniels, it was the beginning of understanding what respect truly meant, not as a word, but as an action. He didn't know it yet, but this day would stay with him for years. The careless joke, the calm reaction, the moment he realized who she really was, all of it would become the lesson that changed how he saw himself and others forever. And somewhere in that quiet hotel room, Alicia Brown, the woman he had tried to joke with, wrote in her final note for the day, "Growth begins where awareness starts." The next morning, the police station was unusually quiet. The usual laughter, the teasing, and the loud chatter were gone. Everyone spoke in low tones, careful about what they said. The story about what happened the previous day had already spread. No one wanted to make the same mistake again. Officer Daniels came in early, hoping to avoid attention, but he could feel every pair of eyes on him. Some gave him looks of pity, others of judgment. He didn't blame them. He knew what he'd done. He sat at his desk, pretending to go through reports, but his mind was elsewhere. He couldn't stop thinking about Alicia. The calm way she had handled the situation had left a deep mark on him. She didn't yell, didn't insult him, didn't even demand punishment. That silence, that quiet confidence made him feel smaller than any lecture ever could. The chief walked in holding a folder, his face serious. "Daniels, my office," he said. Daniels stood immediately, heart pounding. He followed the chief into the small office where the blinds were half closed. The chief closed the door behind them and sighed. "You know why you're here," he began. "Yes, sir," Daniels said quietly. "I made a mistake." The chief nodded slowly. "That's putting it lightly. Director Brown's office has scheduled a full evaluation. Will be reviewed for conduct, professionalism, and internal culture. She'll be leading it herself." Daniels looked up in surprise. "She's coming back?" "She never left," the chief replied. "She's at the city hall right now, going through our public records. She'll be back here this afternoon." Daniels felt his stomach twist again. "Sir, I didn't mean—" The chief raised a hand. "I know, but it doesn't matter what you meant. What matters is what you did. You embarrassed this department, and worse, you embarrassed yourself." Daniels nodded. "I understand." The chief leaned back. "You're a good officer, Daniels. You do your job well, but you don't think before you speak. That has to change. I suggest you take today to listen and learn. No jokes, no trying to explain yourself. Just listen." Daniels agreed quietly and left the office. By noon, Alicia had returned. She walked in with her notebook again, calm as always. The entire station seemed to straighten up at once. Even the sound of her footsteps carried a quiet authority. She greeted the front desk politely, then asked to meet with the chief and staff. Daniel sat near the back of the room, avoiding her eyes. When she spoke, her voice was even and steady. "Thank you all for meeting with me again. As you know, my office evaluates not only public complaints, but also the culture within departments. How officers treat each other often reflects how they treat the community. I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm here to understand what can be improved." Her words carried no anger, only purpose. The room listened carefully. She asked about training, procedures, and public relations. The officers answered as best they could, some nervously, some sincerely. Daniels noticed that she never raised her tone, even when she caught inconsistencies in their answers. She simply asked follow-up questions that made people think deeper. "When was the last time you attended a community event out of uniform?" she asked one officer. "How often do you speak with residents outside of calls?" she asked another. Each question seemed simple, but it revealed so much. When the meeting ended, she thanked everyone and asked to speak privately with Daniels. The room grew still. Daniels hesitated, then followed her to a small office. The door closed behind them, and for a moment neither spoke. She set her notebook on the table and looked at him. "Do you know why I didn't react yesterday?" she asked calmly. Daniels swallowed. Because you're better than I was, he said honestly. She gave a faint smile. No, because I've seen it before. More times than I can count, he looked down. I really didn't mean any harm. I believe you, she said. But intent doesn't erase impact. When you did that, it wasn't just about a joke. It was about how easy it was for you to cross a line without realizing it. That's what concerns me. He nodded slowly. I see that now. She leaned back slightly. I hope you do. Because what happened yesterday isn't just a story about a bad joke. It's about respect. When people in positions of authority forget what respect looks like, it affects everything. It affects trust, safety, and community. Daniels listened, silent and ashamed. I want to fix it, he said finally. Not because I'm scared of losing my job, but because I get it now. I embarrassed myself. I made someone feel small. That's not who I want to be. Alicia nodded, studying him for a moment. Good. Then start by changing how you see people. Every person who walks through that door deserves the same respect you'd give to your chief, your mother, or anyone else you admire. If you can learn that, you'll be a better officer than you've ever been. After she left, Daniel sat in that small office for a long time, thinking about her words. They weren't angry, but they carried weight. He knew she was right. He had spent years thinking jokes made him friendly, when in reality they often made others uncomfortable. For the first time, he saw himself from the outside, and he didn't like what he saw. The following days were tense but productive. Alicia worked closely with the department, reviewing reports, interviewing officers, and observing interactions with the public. She spent time in the field, talking to citizens, asking how they felt about the police. Daniels often watched from a distance, noticing how people spoke to her with ease and respect. She had a natural way of making others feel heard. It was something he admired deeply. One afternoon, she joined a few officers for a patrol again, this time inviting Daniels along. The air was lighter than before, though still careful. They visited a few neighborhoods, checked in on local stores, and spoke with residents. Alicia listened more than she spoke, asking simple but thoughtful questions. Daniels noticed how people smiled when she talked. It wasn't because she tried to charm them, but because she made them feel valued. At one point, they stopped by a small grocery store where an elderly man was having trouble loading his bags. Daniels stepped out to help him, and Alicia smiled quietly, jotting something down in her notebook. What are you writing? He asked, curious. She looked up and said, Noting progress. He chuckled nervously. Progress? That's just helping someone with groceries. That's where it starts, she replied. Respect begins in small moments. Later, as they drove back, Daniels asked her a question that had been on his mind. How do you stay so calm all the time? If I were in your position yesterday, I think I would have yelled. She looked out the window thinking. I used to, she said. But I realized anger doesn't always change hearts. Sometimes silence does. It forces people to see their reflection. Daniels nodded slowly. Well, it worked, he said quietly. She smiled faintly. Good. Then maybe something good will come out of it after all. That evening, after the patrol, Alicia held a short session with the officers. She spoke about communication, awareness, and empathy. She shared stories from other departments, some inspiring, some painful, but all real. The officers listened closely. Her words were never heavy-handed. They were honest, human. She talked about moments where officers made simple choices that changed lives for better or worse. The way you speak to someone might be the only memory they carry of you, she said. Make it a good one. Daniels couldn't stop thinking about those words. That night, when he got home, he looked at himself in the mirror for a long time. For the first time in years, he didn't see just a uniform or a job. He saw a man who had a lot to learn. He sat down at his kitchen table and began writing in a small notebook. It wasn't something he usually did, but he wanted to remember what she said, word for word. Respect begins in small moments. He wrote that at the top of the page. The next day, he arrived early again, but this time with a different mindset. When a woman came in to file a complaint about a parking ticket, he listened patiently instead of brushing her off. When a young officer cracked a sarcastic joke, Daniels gently told him, Be careful. Words carry weight. The officer gave him a puzzled look but didn't argue. Daniels realized change wasn't about grand gestures. It was about quiet consistency. Alicia noticed the difference too. She saw how Daniels carried himself differently. More aware, more careful, more grounded. He no longer tried to fill every silence with a laugh. Instead, he listened and people noticed. By the end of the week, she called him into her office again. "I can see the effort," she said. "It's not easy to change habits, but you're doing it." He smiled a little, feeling both proud and humbled. "I'm trying," he said. "That's all anyone can ask," she replied. The department slowly began to shift as well. The other officers followed his lead, adjusting their tone, being more mindful of their words. Even the atmosphere in the station started to feel different, calmer, more respectful. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Alicia continued her assessment quietly, never showing favoritism, never seeking attention. But the respect everyone had for her grew each day. She carried herself with dignity, the kind that didn't need to be demanded, it was naturally given. Daniels admired that more than anything. She had turned what could have been a moment of humiliation into a lesson for everyone, himself most of all. As the week came to an end, Alicia announced that she would be finalizing her report soon. The department gathered once more for a short debriefing. She thanked everyone for their cooperation and mentioned that progress was being made. "Change doesn't happen overnight," she said. "It takes awareness, humility, and time. But I see hope here." When the meeting ended, Daniels waited until most people had left before approaching her. "Director Brown," he said quietly. She turned toward him with that same calm expression. "Yes, Officer Daniels?" He hesitated for a second, then said, "Thank you for not giving up on this place or on me." Her expression softened. "People make mistakes," she said. "What matters is what they do after." Then she picked up her notebook, gave a polite nod, and walked away. As she left, Daniels watched her go, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. He knew he still had a lot to learn, but for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was becoming the person he wanted to be. Not just a police officer, but a better human being. The station doors closed behind her, but her words stayed in the air like a quiet echo, simple, strong, and unforgettable. And though he didn't realize it yet, this was only the beginning of a much deeper change, one that would soon reach far beyond the walls of their small-town station. The following week brought a different kind of energy to the police station. There was less tension now, but a quiet awareness filled the air. Everyone knew that Alicia's review was still ongoing, yet something about her presence had already changed how they behaved. Conversations were gentler, laughter more careful, and interactions with the public carried more respect. It wasn't fear that drove the change anymore. It was understanding. Officer Daniels noticed it the most. Each day he arrived early, greeting everyone politely and focusing on his work. He still made the occasional light-hearted comment, but never at anyone's expense. The others saw it too. The man who once led every joke now seemed more thoughtful. It wasn't a forced change. It felt real. That morning, the chief called everyone for a short meeting. "Director Brown will be observing a few field situations today," he said. "She wants to see how we handle calls under pressure." Daniels tried not to show it, but his stomach tightened. The last time she rode along, he'd felt nervous the entire time. But this time he wanted to prove, not to her but to himself, that he'd learned something. When she arrived, she wore the same calm expression as always. Her tone was polite, her movements deliberate. "I'll be joining Officer Daniels today," she said. Daniels nodded respectfully, surprised but grateful for the opportunity. They got into the patrol car and started their route through the neighborhoods. The morning was slow. Routine calls, traffic checks, a noise complaint. Alicia sat quietly beside him, taking notes, occasionally asking small questions about procedure. But it didn't feel like she was judging him. It felt more like she was trying to understand how the team worked. Daniels found himself explaining things with care, making sure his tone stayed professional. Around midday, they received a call about a minor car accident near the shopping district. When they arrived, two drivers were standing outside their vehicles arguing. One man was angry, shouting about the other's careless driving. The other looked nervous, clearly shaken. Daniel stepped in, calm and polite. "Let's take a breath," he said gently. "No one's hurt, right? Let's focus on sorting this out." Alicia stood nearby, quietly watching. She didn't interrupt, just observed how Daniels handled the situation. He listened to both sides, took notes, and spoke in an even tone. When one of the drivers tried to argue again, Daniels raised a hand. not in anger, but as a signal for peace. "I understand you're upset," he said, "but yelling won't fix anything. Let's stay respectful." Within minutes, the tension eased. The two drivers calmed down, and the situation was resolved smoothly. When they got back in the car, Alicia gave him a small nod. "You handled that well," she said. Daniels felt a quiet sense of pride. "Thank you," he said softly. For a few moments, they rode in silence. Then Alicia spoke again, her tone thoughtful. "You see the difference now, don't you?" she said. Daniels glanced at her. "What do you mean?" "The power of respect," she replied. "You didn't raise your voice, didn't assert dominance. You just treated them like people. And because of that, they responded the same way." Daniels smiled faintly. "I guess it really does come full circle." She nodded. "Always." They continued their patrol, visiting several areas that had been marked as problem zones. Alicia wanted to see how the officers interacted with different communities. In one neighborhood, children ran up to the car, waving. Daniel smiled and waved back. A few months ago, he might have made a sarcastic joke or kept driving. But now he rolled down the window and greeted them warmly. The kids laughed and asked questions about the police car. Alicia watched the interaction closely. "Do they always come up like that?" she asked. "Not always," Daniels admitted. "Sometimes they're scared. I guess it depends on how we act when we're around." She smiled. "That's true everywhere, not just here." Later that afternoon, they stopped at a local community center where an outreach program was taking place. Alicia had suggested it earlier in the week, hoping to see more community engagement from the officers. A few volunteers were organizing supplies for families in need, and Alicia encouraged Daniels to help out. He didn't hesitate. Together they carried boxes, sorted food, and spoke with residents. One woman approached Alicia and said quietly, "It's nice to see officers helping out like this. It makes us feel safer." Alicia thanked her kindly and gestured toward Daniels. "It's their community too," she said. "When people connect, everyone wins." By the end of the day, Daniels felt exhausted but fulfilled. He hadn't just completed his duty. He had actually felt useful. Alicia seemed pleased, though her expression remained as composed as always. "You've come a long way in a short time," she said as they returned to the station. "Keep going." Inside, the other officers noticed the difference in both of them. The energy around Daniels had changed completely. He was no longer trying to prove himself, he was just doing his job with purpose. That made people respect him more than they ever had before. Over the next few days, Alicia continued her evaluation. She reviewed reports, watched security footage, and spoke privately with the staff. Each interview was quiet and respectful. She never made anyone feel attacked, but her questions always made them think deeply about their actions and the culture of their workplace. Some officers left her office in silence, clearly reflecting on what she'd said. Daniels had another meeting with her later that week. When he entered her office, she was reading through a thick stack of papers. She looked up and motioned for him to sit. "How do you feel things are going?" she asked. "Better," he said honestly. "It's like everyone's seeing things a little differently now." "That's a good start," she said. "Change always begins with awareness, but awareness has to lead to consistency." He nodded, understanding. "Can I ask you something?" he said. She nodded. "Of course. Why do you do this job? It can't be easy going from department to department facing all this pressure." Alicia paused, then smiled slightly. "Because I believe people can change. I've seen officers who started out careless or angry become some of the kindest people I've ever met. Sometimes all they needed was a mirror to see who they really were." Daniel sat quietly, letting her words sink in. "I think I get that now," he said softly. She nodded, pleased. "Then you've already done the hardest part." A few days later, Alicia organized a group meeting called Open Talk. It wasn't mandatory, but most of the department showed up anyway. The chairs were arranged in a circle, no uniforms, no ranks, just people. Alicia began by saying, "We're not here to criticize. We're here to listen." One by one, officers began to speak. Some admitted they'd made mistakes or said things they regretted. Others spoke about how they'd never thought about how small actions could hurt others. Daniels shared his story too. He didn't name Alicia directly, but everyone knew what he was referring to. "I thought joking made me friendly," he said quietly. "But it turns out I was just trying to avoid being uncomfortable. I never stopped to think about how the other person felt." That's something I won't forget again." The room was silent for a moment. Then Alicia spoke gently. "It takes courage to admit that," she said. "And that's the beginning of real leadership." The meeting lasted over an hour, filled with honest stories and quiet reflection. When it ended, there was a different feeling in the room, something lighter, almost peaceful. For the first time, everyone felt connected, not just as coworkers, but as people trying to do better. Later that evening, as Alicia was packing her notebook, Daniels approached her again. "That meeting meant a lot," he said. "I think everyone needed it." She smiled softly. "Sometimes people just need a safe place to be honest. That's how real change happens." Over the weekend, the department began new initiatives inspired by her guidance. Monthly community visits, workshops on empathy and communication, and even small gestures like greeting residents by name. Daniels volunteered to lead some of these programs, wanting to prove his commitment. One afternoon, Alicia stopped by one of the outreach events. Children were painting murals with officers, families were chatting, and laughter filled the park. Daniel stood helping a little boy paint a police badge on the wall. When he saw her, he smiled. "Didn't expect to see you here today." She smiled back. "I wanted to see progress in action." He looked around. "Feels different now, doesn't it?" "It does," she agreed, "because people are seeing each other, not as uniforms, not as titles, just as humans." As the sun began to set, the event slowly wrapped up. Alicia watched the officers helping clean up, chatting with families, smiling genuinely. She took a deep breath, feeling a quiet sense of accomplishment. Change had begun, and it felt real. When the day ended, she met with the chief one last time that week. "Your department has shown improvement," she said. "There's still work to be done, but the foundation is there." The chief nodded, looking relieved. "We'll keep it going," he said. "I promise." Outside, Daniel saw her walking to her car. He jogged over, stopping a few feet away. "Director Brown," he called out. She turned, smiling faintly. "Yes?" "Thank you," he said simply. "For not giving up on us." She tilted her head slightly. "I never planned to give up," she said. "I only hoped you wouldn't give up on yourselves." He nodded, understanding her completely. "I won't," he said. She gave a small nod and got into her car. As she drove away, Daniels watched the taillights fade down the quiet street, feeling something he hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. That night he sat at his desk at home, writing again in his notebook. He didn't write about mistakes this time. He wrote about lessons, about respect, humility, and growth. He wrote about how a single moment, a single act of carelessness, had become the turning point of his life. He closed the notebook and looked out the window. The town lights shimmered in the distance, and for the first time, he felt proud of the man he was becoming. And somewhere across town, Alicia sat in her hotel room finishing her report. Her notes were thorough, but her final sentence was short and simple. "Change is possible when respect replaces pride." She smiled, closed the folder, and looked out at the quiet night sky. It wasn't the end of her work, just another reminder of why she did what she did. Neither of them knew it yet, but the lessons from that small town would travel far beyond its borders. It would inspire other departments, other officers, and other communities to reflect, to learn, and to grow. All because one moment of thoughtlessness had turned into a story of awareness and redemption. And in that, there was something powerful, proof that even small changes can echo loudly when they come from the heart. Months passed since the day Alicia left that small town. The police station had changed more than anyone expected. It wasn't perfect, but the difference was visible, in the way officers spoke to each other, in how they greeted citizens, and in how they handled their duties. There was more patience, more listening, and less ego. Daniels had become one of the most respected officers there. People noticed his calmness, his steady tone, his ability to handle tension without making things worse. He didn't chase attention anymore. He just did his job with quiet confidence. One cold morning, as he poured coffee in the break room, the chief walked in with a smile. "Got some news for you," he said. Daniels raised a brow. "Good news, I hope." "Depends how you take it," the chief replied. "Director Brown's team is coming back for a follow-up review. She'll be here next week." Daniels froze for a second, then smiled faintly. "Really? That soon?" "Apparently she wants to see how things have held up," the chief said. I think she's curious. Daniels nodded slowly. Well, I'm glad she's coming. She deserves to see the progress. The chief gave a small laugh. You've come a long way, Daniels. A few months ago, I would have had to drag you into a meeting like this. Daniels chuckled, shaking his head. Yeah, those days feel far away. When Alicia returned the next week, the entire department felt different. There was no tension this time, just excitement. Officers greeted her warmly as she walked through the doors, shaking hands and smiling. Even she seemed surprised at how relaxed the atmosphere was. Feels lighter in here, she said softly to the chief. It's not just the paint on the walls, he smiled. People started taking ownership of their behavior. That came from you, she shook her head. It came from them choosing to do better. I only reminded them it was possible. The next few days were filled with evaluations and observations again, but this time, Alicia noticed something deeper. It wasn't about surface changes, and it was about habits that had formed quietly. Officers now checked in on each other. They volunteered for community work on weekends. They even created a mentorship program for new recruits, teaching them respect and empathy from day one. Daniels was part of that program. Alicia watched one session from the back of the room. He stood before a small group of young trainees, explaining what it truly meant to wear the badge. This job isn't about control, he said, his voice steady. It's about connection. You'll meet people on their worst days. Sometimes they'll yell or push back. Don't let that change who you are. Respect is your real authority. Once you lose that, you lose everything. Alicia sat quietly, smiling. She could see the sincerity in his eyes. It wasn't a rehearsed speech. It was lived truth. After the session ended, she approached him. That was powerful, she said. He turned, smiling modestly. I just told them what I wish someone had told me when I started. Well, she said, now you're that someone. He looked down for a moment, humbled by her words. Funny how life works, he said softly. Later that afternoon, they drove out together again, this time not for work, but for reflection. Alicia wanted to visit the park where the community outreach program had begun. As they walked through the open space, children played, families laughed, and murals painted by the neighborhood decorated the walls. The once divided community now felt united, as if old wounds had started healing. This place used to feel heavy, Daniel said quietly. Now it's alive, Alicia nodded. Change happens slowly, but when it's real, it lasts. They sat on a bench for a while, watching kids run past. For a few minutes, they didn't speak. Then Daniels broke the silence. You know, he said, I used to think leadership was about being the loudest person in the room. But it's really about listening, Alicia smiled faintly. That's something most people never learn. He turned to her. I never got to thank you properly. Not just for helping me, but for staying patient even when I didn't deserve it. She looked at him thoughtfully. You didn't owe me thanks, she said. You owed yourself a chance to grow. You took it. Their conversation was interrupted by a young woman who approached nervously. Excuse me, she said. Are you Officer Daniels? He nodded politely. Yes, I am. How can I help you? The woman smiled. You probably don't remember me, but months ago you came to our street when there was an argument. You helped calm things down. I just wanted to say thank you. My brother was one of the people involved that day. He's doing better now, even joined the community cleanup project. Daniel smiled warmly. I'm really glad to hear that. As the woman walked away, Alicia looked at him and said softly, There's your real review. He laughed lightly. I'll take that over a report any day. Later that evening, Alicia attended the department's monthly community forum. Residents, officers, and local leaders gathered to discuss concerns and ideas. What struck her most was how open the dialogue had become. People no longer shouted across the room. They spoke with trust. When one older man stood up and said, I used to fear calling the police. Now I feel like I'm calling neighbors. The room filled with quiet emotion. Alicia looked around, her heart full. She'd seen many departments in her career, but this one, this transformation, felt special. After the meeting, the chief approached her with a folder in hand. We'd like you to see something, he said. Inside the folder was a proposal titled Community Unity Initiative. It outlined monthly volunteer events, mentorship programs, and annual open forums, all designed to maintain the culture of respect they'd built. Alicia smiled as she flipped through the pages. "This is impressive," she said. "Who drafted this?" "Daniels and a few others," the chief replied. "He's become a real leader here." That night, as Alicia prepared her notes for her final report, she thought about the journey, how it all began with a careless moment, and how it turned into something much bigger. The report she was about to write wasn't just about compliance or policy. It was about people, humility, and growth. The next morning, she sat across from Daniels in her office one last time. "Your department has exceeded expectations," she said. "But I'm not just talking about statistics. I'm talking about mindset." Daniels smiled, slightly nervous. "That means a lot coming from you." "You've shown what true accountability looks like," she said. "You didn't just apologize, and you evolved. And now you're helping others do the same. That's leadership." He leaned back slightly, his expression thoughtful. "It feels good to make things right," he said. "But I know it's something I'll have to keep doing every day." "That's exactly it," she said. "Respect isn't a destination. It's a daily choice." Before she left that afternoon, the department gathered to thank her. The chief gave a short speech, but it was Daniels who stepped forward at the end. "We're grateful for your guidance," he said. "You didn't just evaluate us, you reminded us who we could be." Alicia smiled, touched by the sincerity in his voice. "All I did was give you a mirror," she said softly. "You chose to see the reflection." The applause that followed wasn't loud or flashy. It was warm, heartfelt, a sound of genuine gratitude. When Alicia finally got into her car to leave, Daniels walked her to the door. "Take care, Director Brown," he said. "If you ever need someone for your next project, you know where to find me." She smiled. "I'll keep that in mind, officer." As she drove away, she glanced in the rearview mirror and saw him standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her car disappear down the street. There was something symbolic about it, a chapter closing but the story continuing. Back at her office a week later, Alicia submitted her final report. Her last paragraph read, "This department serves as proof that dignity can rebuild trust faster than punishment ever could. Real transformation doesn't come from fear. It comes from reflection. When people are seen, they rise." She sent the report and leaned back in her chair, feeling a quiet sense of peace. Meanwhile, life at the station continued. Daniels kept leading by example, never forgetting where he'd started. He became known not just for his work ethic, but for his humility. When new recruits arrived, they often heard stories about how the department once changed course because of one unexpected moment. A mistake that became a lesson for everyone. And though Alicia had moved on to other projects, her name was often mentioned with respect. Whenever an officer found themselves losing patience or speaking without thinking, someone would quietly remind them, "Remember what the director said? Respect first, always." Months later, during a regional conference, Daniel saw her again. She was one of the keynote speakers, addressing leaders from various departments. Her topic, humanity and law enforcement. As she spoke, her voice filled the room with calm strength. "We cannot fix every mistake," she said, "but we can choose how we respond to them. Real strength is found in empathy, not authority." Daniel sat in the audience, listening quietly, a small smile on his face. When the session ended, he waited until the crowd thinned out before approaching her. "You still have a way of making people think," he said. She smiled. "And you still have a way of proving that people can change." They talked for a while, catching up on their respective journeys. When they parted ways again, there was mutual respect, not just between a director and an officer, but between two people who had helped each other grow. And as Alicia walked away that day, Daniels thought about how far they'd both come from that first uneasy encounter, how something that began with humiliation had turned into one of the most meaningful experiences of his life. He understood now that real change never comes with a single action. It's built one decision at a time, one apology, one effort, one moment of understanding after another. And though he would never forget the mistake that started it all, he no longer carried it as shame. He carried it as proof. Proof that even the most painful moments can lead to something good if the heart is open enough to learn. A year passed since Alicia had first walked into that police department. So much had changed since then that sometimes it felt like an entirely different place. What used to be a tense, divided station was now filled with laughter, kindness, and quiet confidence. Officers no longer moved like strangers working under the same roof. They moved like a team that cared for each other. The community had noticed too. Calls of complaints had gone down. Reports of cooperation had gone up. The town finally felt safe again, not just because of law enforcement, but because trust had returned. Daniel sat at his desk one cool morning, sipping coffee and flipping through the latest monthly report. For once, the numbers actually told a story of peace. He smiled as he read the updates from neighborhood watch groups and community events. The Unity program, as everyone now called it, had become one of the most successful initiatives the department ever started. The chief stepped into his office with a grin. "You're being too quiet, Daniels. Usually you'd be running around fixing a dozen things before noon." Daniels chuckled. "Guess everything's running smoother these days. Not much to fix anymore." "That's because you fixed the biggest thing already," the chief said. "The culture." Daniels smiled modestly, shaking his head. "It wasn't just me." The chief leaned against the doorframe. "You've got something coming in the mail today. I think you'll like it." Before Daniels could ask what it was, the chief winked and walked away. Later that afternoon, a delivery arrived, a thick envelope with an official seal. Daniels opened it carefully. Inside was a letter from the National Police Ethics Council. His heart skipped a beat as he read the first few lines. He'd been nominated for the Service Transformation Award. He froze for a moment, then leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. He remembered the man he used to be, the one who laughed too loud, joked too easily, and thought carelessness was harmless. Now he was being recognized for helping build something meaningful. There was one line at the bottom of the letter that caught his eye. "Director Alicia Brown has personally recommended you for this honor." He couldn't help but smile. A few weeks later, he stood in a large conference hall in the city, surrounded by officers, directors, and community leaders from across the country. The award ceremony was formal but warm. As his name was announced, Daniels walked onto the stage, a quiet pride in his steps. The host spoke briefly about his contribution, how he had turned a mistake into a movement that inspired hundreds. Then she said, "And it is our honor to have the person who first guided this transformation, Director Alicia Brown, here to present the award." The audience clapped as Alicia walked up to the stage. She looked poised as ever, calm and steady. When their eyes met, Daniel smiled. She returned the smile with a look that said, "You earned this." When she handed him the award, she leaned in slightly and whispered, "Full circle." He nodded. "Full circle." After the ceremony, they stood together near the back of the hall, away from the crowd. "I didn't expect you'd still remember me after all this," he said, smiling shyly. Alicia raised a brow. "Forget the department that gave me hope again?" "Not likely," he chuckled. "You've been keeping busy, I'm sure." "I have," she said. "But stories like yours remind me why I keep doing this." He looked down at the plaque in his hands. "You know, I used to think awards didn't mean much. But this one feels different." "That's because it's not about you," she said softly. "It's about everyone you lifted with you." They talked for a while about the project still running back in town, the new recruits, the youth mentorship programs, the families who'd become part of community policing efforts. Alicia listened with genuine interest, occasionally jotting something in her small notebook. "You're still writing everything down," Daniels teased. "Old habit," she said with a smile. "Every story teaches something new." That evening, Alicia left the city feeling proud, not of the ceremony, but of the proof that compassion could really rebuild broken systems. But her story with Daniels wasn't over yet. Several months later, she received a letter from him. It wasn't formal, just handwritten and sincere. He wrote about how the department had started a partnership with local schools, helping kids learn about civic duty and respect. He mentioned a young girl who told him she wanted to be a police officer someday because she'd seen how kind they could be. At the end of the letter, he'd written, "You taught me that change isn't about what we do once, it's about what we do every day. I wanted you to know that the lessons you gave us are still alive here. Thank you always." Alicia kept that letter in her desk drawer. Every time her work felt heavy, she'd take it out and read it. It reminded her that every hard day was worth it. A year later, she was invited to speak at a major national conference on reform and ethics. The organizers wanted her to talk about real success stories, not theories. Without hesitation, she spoke about that small-town department, about the day she walked in and everything changed, not because of authority, but because of humanity. The audience listened in complete silence as she spoke. She described the officer who had made a mistake, learned from it, and used that lesson to rebuild trust with an entire community. When she finished, she said softly, "The most powerful thing I've ever seen isn't punishment, it's redemption. And the most powerful tool in leadership isn't control, it's understanding." The audience stood and applauded. Later, as she stepped off the stage, a man approached her. It was Daniels again. He'd come without telling her, just to listen. "You always were good with words,"